Welcome to Café Tales. I'm Alie, your host for today's mystery. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Let me know in the comments. Grab your favorite beverage. Wolfe would recommend beer. Archie might suggest milk. Sit back, and let's join the most sedentary detective in New York as he tackles a case that comes to him quite literally on a plate. Nero Wolfe and a corpse for breakfast. Chapter 1. An unwelcome invitation. It was a Tuesday morning in May, one of those perfect New York spring days that make you forgive the city for February. I was finishing up a letter to a prospective client when Nero Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 11 Row. He crossed to his desk, lowered his 1/7 of a ton into the custom-built chair, and pressed the button for beer before he even glanced at the morning mail I'd arranged. Fritz entered with the tray, opened a bottle of beer, filled Wolfe's glass, and departed. Only after the first satisfying gulp did Wolfe's eyes move to acknowledge my existence. "Good morning," I said. "A Mrs. Henderson wants you to find her missing Pomeranian. She's willing to pay your daily rate." He reached for the stack of mail. "Since you're in such a good mood," I continued, "I should probably mention that I've accepted an invitation for us for tomorrow." His eyes, which had been scanning a letter, snapped up to mine. "Us. Yes. You and me. To attend a taping of the Gourmet Show at the Studio 10 building on 46th Street. They're doing a special on French sauces. The executive producer is Diana Moore. You remember, the sister of that jeweler we helped last year." Wolfe put the letter down. "I do not attend television recordings, or broadcasts, or whatever they are called." "I thought you might say that. But this episode features Marcel Bouvier." That got a reaction. The corner of his mouth twitched downward. Marcel Bouvier had been a thorn in Wolfe's side ever since he'd published that article in Cuisine Monthly, claiming that Rusterman's restaurant had fallen into mediocrity. Rusterman's wasn't only Wolfe's favorite restaurant, it had been owned by his oldest friend and was now run by a board that included Wolfe himself. The criticism had been personal. "I have no interest in that man's performances," Wolfe said. "His palate is defective, and his knowledge of traditional cuisine is superficial. I would derive no pleasure from his demonstration." "That's the point. You get to see him make a fool of himself on live television." I leaned back in my chair. "He's doing a special on hollandaise. I distinctly remember you telling Marco that Bouvier couldn't make a decent hollandaise if Auguste Escoffier himself rose from the grave to guide him." Wolfe reached for his beer, his face impassive. He took a slow sip, then glanced at the ceiling, a sure sign he was considering something against his better judgment. "Live television is an abomination," he said finally. "The noise, the artificial lighting, the incessant chatter, it would be 2 hours." "The studio is air-conditioned," I said, "and Diana has reserved front-row seats for us." "Front row," he muttered, as if I'd suggested we sit on a bed of nails. I played my trump card. "I happen to know the Times food critic will be there. Bouvier doesn't know this, but they're doing a feature on whether his recipes work as well for home cooks as he claims. If his demonstration flops, it'll be in print the next day." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You have manipulated this situation." "I prefer arranged." Diana called with the invitation, and I immediately thought of how much you'd enjoy watching Bouvier squirm when his sauce breaks on live TV. "And you accepted without consulting me." "I'm consulting you just now. The show's at 10 tomorrow morning. You'll miss only an hour with the orchids." He returned to the mail, which I knew was just for show. He was thinking it over. Finally, he looked up. "Very well. But we will take a taxi, not the subway. regardless of traffic, and we will leave the moment the demonstration concludes." "Absolutely." I agreed. "I'll call Diana and confirm." You realize, of course, that this Bouvier person may actually succeed in producing an adequate sauce. His incompetence, while vast, is not guaranteed to manifest itself conveniently for our entertainment. "That's a risk I'm willing to take," I said. "Besides, if he does manage a decent hollandaise, you can always find fault with his technique." "I do not find fault, Archie. I observe reality." He picked up another letter and sliced it open with his gold letter opener. "Please inform Fritz that I will require a particularly satisfying lunch tomorrow to compensate for this disruption." I grinned and reached for the phone. Getting Wolfe to leave the brownstone voluntarily was rare enough to count as a victory, even if it involved appealing to his culinary vindictiveness. What I didn't know then was that our little excursion would lead to one of the most peculiar cases in our long association, one that would offend Wolfe's sensibilities in ways far beyond bad cooking. At dinner that evening, Wolfe was uncharacteristically inquisitive about the gourmet show and its star. I told him what I knew, that Bouvier had leveraged a single successful restaurant into a mini-empire of cookbooks, kitchen gadgets, and now this television show, which had been running for 3 seasons. He specializes in making French cuisine, accessible to American home cooks, I explained over Fritz's perfectly roasted duck. Some purists think he oversimplifies things. "He adulterates," Wolfe corrected between bites. "There is a difference. Simplification can be valuable. What he does is substitute inferior methods and ingredients while claiming equivalent results." "Well, tomorrow you'll get to see him work in person." "Indeed." He dabbed his lips with his napkin, a prospect I anticipate with all the enthusiasm of a dental appointment. Neither of us had any idea that we were about to witness not just bad cooking, but murder. Chapter 2. The last broadcast at exactly 9:30. The next morning, a black heron sedan pulled up in front of the brownstone. Wolfe was at the breakfast table, having his customary soft-boiled eggs and scrapple, when I stuck my head in to announce our ride had arrived. "Already?" He glanced at his wristwatch with a frown. "Traffic between here and Midtown might be rough. Better early than late." He sighed, dabbed at his lips with the napkin, and rose from the table with the grace of a battleship leaving harbor. I'd learned long ago that rushing Nero Wolfe was like trying to hurry continental drift, but I'd built in extra time for his inevitable delays. To my surprise, he had actually dressed for the occasion. His custom-tailored black suit was freshly pressed, and I detected the faint scent of cologne. "You're looking dapper," I observed as we headed to the front door. "Trying to impress the television audience?" "Nonsense. I merely dress appropriately when appearing in public. We're going to watch a cooking show, not testify before Congress." He didn't bother to respond. The Studio 10 building turned out to be one of those modern glass affairs that Wolfe generally despised on principle. The lobby featured oversized photographs of the network's star personalities, including a particularly smug shot of Marcel Bouvier holding a whisk like it was Excalibur. The security guard directed us to the 3rd floor, and we rode up in an elevator that Wolfe found too small for his comfort, judging by the way his nostrils flared. Diana Moore met us when the elevator doors opened. She was a striking woman, tall and elegant in a charcoal pantsuit with short silver hair that framed an angular face. She gave me a quick hug and extended a hand to Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm delighted you could make it." Archie said it. "Was a long shot," Wolfe said, taking her hand briefly. "Miss Moore," I corrected. "Absolutely. The best in the house. We start taping in 20 minutes, but I thought you might enjoy a quick tour of the studio first. Wolfe looked like he would enjoy a root canal more, but he inclined his head slightly. As you wish. As Diana led us through a maze of corridors, she explained the show's format. Marcel demonstrates 3 recipes in each episode, taking questions from the audience between segments. Today, it's all about mother sauces. He's doing hollandaise, béarnaise, and his own modernized version of espagnole. Modernized, Wolfe repeated, his eyebrows rising a fraction of an inch, which for him was the equivalent of a shocked gasp. That's his specialty, Diana said, making classical techniques more accessible for home cooks. More accessible is frequently a euphemism for compromised, Wolfe muttered. Diana smiled diplomatically and pushed open a set of double doors. We entered what looked like organized chaos. The studio was about the size of a high school gymnasium, but most of it was occupied by cameras, lights, cables, and assorted equipment I couldn't name. At the center was a gleaming kitchen set with professional-grade appliances and a large counter facing rows of audience seats. "There's your man," I said quietly to Wolfe, nodding toward the far side of the studio. Marcel. Bouvier stood near the producer's table, gesticulating as he spoke to a harried-looking young man in an apron. Bouvier was shorter than I'd expected, but what he lacked in height he made up for in presence. His chef's whites were spotless, his dark hair artfully tousled, and even from a distance I could see the practiced smile that had launched. 1,000 cookbooks. That's James Reed, his sous chef, Diana explained, nodding toward the young man. He does all the prep work and assists during the show. Reed looked to be in his early 30s, with the compact build of someone who spent long hours on his feet. He was nodding rapidly as Bouvier spoke, occasionally glancing at a clipboard in his hands. "And over there," Diana continued, "is Victoria Lansing from Gourmet Essentials. They're the show's main sponsor." She indicated a sleek blonde woman in a designer suit who was examining the product placement area, where shiny cookware was carefully arranged. Even from a distance, Miss Lansing's expression suggested she found something unsatisfactory about the display. "The gentleman in the tweed jacket by the cameras is Leonard Graves," Diana added. I recognized the name immediately. "The food critic? The one who's secretly reviewing the show?" "Not so secretly anymore," Diana said with a grimace. "Someone leaked it to Marcel this morning. He's been impossible ever since." Graves was a thin, scholarly-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He was making notes in a small leather-bound book, seemingly oblivious to the activity around him. "Ah, I see our audience is arriving," Diana said as people began filing into the seating area. "Let me show you to your places. We've reserved front row center as promised." As we followed her, I noticed Wolfe studying the kitchen setup with the intensity he usually reserved for murder scenes. I couldn't tell if he was appalled or impressed by the professional arrangement. We had just taken our seats when Bouvier spotted Wolfe. The chef froze mid-sentence, then excused himself from Reed and made a beeline toward us. Diana muttered something that sounded like, "Oh dear," under her breath. "Nero Wolfe," Bouvier proclaimed in a French accent that had probably been softened by decades in America. "What an unexpected honor. Have you come to learn proper sauce technique?" At last. Wolfe regarded him with the same expression he might use for a particularly disappointing orchid specimen. "Mr. Bouvier, I am merely an observer today." Of course. Of course. "Well, I hope you find the demonstration educational." Bouvier's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you will reconsider your outdated views on classic cuisine after seeing my methods." Before Wolfe could respond, A floor director approached Bouvier. 2 minutes to air, chef. We will continue this discussion later, perhaps, Bouvier said with a nod that somehow managed to be condescending. He turned and strode back to the kitchen set. That went better than I expected, I murmured to Wolfe. Did it? He replied, settling his bulk more comfortably in the reinforced chair Diana had provided. The studio lights brightened. A theme song played, and the floor director counted down with her fingers. Cameras rolled forward on silent wheels, and Bouvier transformed before our eyes from an irritated chef into a beaming television personality. Welcome to the gourmet show, he announced to the camera. Today, we unlock the secrets of the mother sauces, the foundation of French cuisine. Little did any of us know that we were about to witness his final performance. Chapter 3. A Matter of Taste. The first 15 minutes of the show proceeded smoothly enough. Bouvier moved with practiced ease around the kitchen set, explaining the history of mother sauces to the audience, while James Reed silently arranged ingredients at the secondary prep station. Victoria Lansing, the sponsor, stood just off camera, with the tight smile of someone calculating profit margins in real time. The critic Graves scribbled continuously in his notebook, pausing only to adjust his glasses. Wolfe, to my surprise, was watching with genuine attention. His eyes missed nothing, not Reed's precise knife technique, not the arrangement of copper pots, not the way Bouvier whisked his sauce with what even I recognized as excessive showmanship. Now we come to the pinnacle of sauce artistry, Bouvier announced with theatrical flair. The hollandaise, temperamental, luxurious, and utterly transformative. He gestured to a display of perfectly arranged ingredients: butter, egg yolks, lemon juice, and various seasonings. James, the clarified butter, please. Reed brought forward a small saucepan of melted butter, setting it carefully on the induction burner. Bouvier nodded his thanks and turned to the audience. The secret, my friends, is temperature control and patience. Many home cooks rush this process, and he never finished the sentence. In the middle of his explanation, Bouvier paused, frowned slightly, and reached for the counter's edge. His face flushed deep red, then rapidly paled. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but instead made a horrible choking sound. The whisk clattered to the floor. Marcel? Reed stepped forward, confusion turning to alarm. Bouvier's knees buckled. He collapsed, his body convulsing violently before going terrifyingly still. For 3 heartbeats, the studio was frozen in shocked silence. Then pandemonium erupted. "Cut the cameras!" Diana shouted, rushing toward the set. "Get a doctor!" "Is there a doctor here?" Beside me, Wolfe sat motionless, his eyes narrowed to slits. I was already up and moving toward the kitchen area, where Reed was kneeling beside his boss, frantically checking for a pulse. "He's not breathing," Reed said, looking up with panic etched across his face. "I don't understand. He was fine a minute ago." Victoria Lansing stood frozen in place, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth. Leonard Graves had abandoned his notebook and was hovering at the edge of the set, his scholarly detachment replaced by horrified fascination. Within minutes, emergency medical technicians arrived and took over, but their efforts were perfunctory. Even from a distance, I could tell Bouvier was beyond help. The studio had been cleared of audience members, though most of the staff remained clustered in shocked groups. Diana was speaking with a police officer near the entrance. "Archie," I turned to find Wolfe standing behind me, a remarkable departure from his usual immobility. His face was impassive, but there was a glint in his eyes I recognized all too well. "Yes, sir?" I wish to examine the kitchen before the police restrict access. I raised my eyebrows but knew better than to question him when he used that tone. I led the way to the cooking station, where the police hadn't yet established a perimeter. Wolfe moved with surprising deftness around the counters, his gaze methodically sweeping every surface, every utensil. He paid particular attention to the saucepan of clarified butter and the bowl containing the beginnings of the hollandaise. "Satisfactory," he murmured after a moment, more to himself than to me. "What is?" I asked. Before he could answer, a familiar voice boomed across the studio. "For the love of Goodwin! And where there's smoke, there's Wolfe. I might have known." Inspector Kramer of Homicide West strode toward us, his bulky figure moving with the determination of a freight train. His ever-present cigar was clenched between his teeth, unlit as usual in deference to indoor regulations. Behind him trailed Sergeant Stebbins, looking like he'd bitten into something sour. "Inspector," Wolfe greeted him with minimal courtesy. "An unexpected development," Kramer said. "Unexpected? A man drops dead on live television, and I find you two at the scene? That's about as unexpected as rain in April." Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth and jabbed it in Wolfe's direction. "What's your interest here?" "We were simply attending the program as guests," Wolfe replied. "Miss Diana Moore, the producer, is an acquaintance of Mr. Goodwin's." Kramer snorted. "And you just happened to be examining the crime scene when I walked in?" "Crime scene?" I interjected. "Has the medical examiner ruled out natural causes?" "Don't play dumb, Goodwin. You saw him go down. That wasn't a heart attack or a stroke." "Indeed not," Wolfe agreed. "The symptoms suggest poisoning, most likely a rapidly acting neurotoxin." Kramer's frown deepened. "And you know this how?" The progression was characteristic. Facial flushing, respiratory distress, convulsions followed by paralysis. Classic indicators of certain botanical toxins. I didn't bother to hide my surprise. Wolfe rarely volunteered information to Kramer, especially this early in an investigation. Kramer seemed equally taken aback. "Well, that's what the EMS's preliminary assessment suggests too. Now, what exactly were you looking for just now?" "Nothing in particular," Wolfe said blandly. "Mere curiosity." Kramer wasn't buying it. "I want statements from both of you, and I expect you to stay available. Stebbins, get their details." As Stebbins approached with his notebook, I noticed James Reed being escorted to a corner of the studio for questioning. The young man looked shell-shocked, his earlier composure completely shattered. Victoria Lansing was speaking animatedly, on her cell phone near the exit, her business instincts apparently overriding any trauma. Leonard Graves sat alone on an audience chair, staring at the kitchen set with an expression I couldn't quite read. After giving Stebbins the bare facts, I rejoined Wolfe, who had ensconced himself on a sturdy chair near the edge of the action. "Well?" I asked quietly. "What's the angle here?" "I am not yet prepared to say," he replied, his eyes still scanning the studio. "But it would be remiss of us to ignore a murder that occurred literally before our eyes." "So you're taking the case? There isn't even a client yet." "There will be." He shifted slightly in his chair, a sure sign he was uncomfortable, both physically and mentally. "This wasn't merely murder, Archie. It was an offense against civilized practices. To use food, the breaking of bread, which should bring people together, as a delivery method for death?" He shook his head slightly. "Unpardonable." I'd seen Wolfe motivated by many things: money, intellectual challenge, personal grudges, but culinary moral outrage was a new one. Before I could comment, Diana Moore approached us, her professional composure visibly strained. "Mr. Wolfe, Archie, this is horrible. Simply horrible. I can't believe—" She broke off, collecting herself. "The police want to interview everyone who was present." "Naturally," Wolfe said. "Miss Moore, when convenient, I would appreciate your assistance in a professional capacity." She blinked. "You're investigating this?" "I am," Wolfe confirmed. "And I will require unrestricted access to this studio and all relevant personnel." Diana's expression shifted from shock to something like relief. "Whatever you need." Marcel was difficult sometimes, but he didn't deserve this. As she walked away, I leaned closer to Wolfe. "So, we're officially on the case, even without knowing who's paying the bills?" "Temporarily," he conceded. "Now, please observe Mr. Reed, Miss Lansing, and Mr. Graves while they are being questioned. I wish to know which of them appears most concerned with what others might say." I nodded and moved away, wondering what Wolfe had seen in that kitchen that had captured his interest so thoroughly. Whatever it was, I suspected we were in for a case that would test even his formidable abilities. Chapter 4. Ingredients of Murder. By the time we returned to the brownstone that afternoon, news of Marcel Bouvier's death had exploded across every media channel in New York. The official cause wasn't announced, but suspicious circumstances was the phrase of the hour. As instructed, I had observed our 3 primary suspects while they were questioned, and now I was ready to report. To Wolfe. He was at his desk. Beer at his elbow, a book on botanical toxins open before him when I entered the office. "The suspects," he said without preamble. I took my seat and flipped open my notebook. James Reed, the sous chef. 32. Been with Bouvier for 4 years. Before that, he worked at Bouvier's flagship restaurant. During questioning, he seemed genuinely distressed. But there was something else there, too. A tension beneath the shock. When the detective asked about his relationship with Bouvier, he hesitated just a beat too long before saying it was professional and cordial. "Cordial," Wolfe repeated. An interesting choice of word. I thought so, too. Not exactly brimming with warmth. Victoria Lansing, the sponsor, is another story. 45, CEO of Gourmet Essentials. They make high-end kitchen equipment and have built their entire marketing strategy around Bouvier's endorsement. She was on her phone within minutes of his collapse, calling her PR team. When questioned, she was composed, precise, and concerned primarily with how this would affect the upcoming product launch. "Understandable from a business perspective," Wolfe commented, though perhaps unseemly in timing. Leonard Graves, the food critic. 58, writes for The Times and 3 major food magazines. His questioning was the most interesting. On the surface, he was appropriately shocked, offered condolences, the works, but his eyes kept darting back to the kitchen setup, almost obsessively. And when asked about his previous interactions with Bouvier, he was evasive, claimed they were professional acquaintances with mutual respect. Were they? Not according to Diana Moore, who I spoke with afterward. She told me Bouvier and Graves had a very public spat at the International Food Festival last year. Apparently, Graves wrote a scathing review of Bouvier's demonstration, calling his techniques culinary charlatanism. Bouvier retaliated by challenging Graves to a cook-off in front of hundreds of people, then humiliated him when Graves's soufflé collapsed. It was filmed and went semi-viral in foodie circles. Ah. Wolfe sipped his beer. A blow to professional pride, not insignificant. There's more. I made some calls on the way home. Bouvier was planning to publish a book called Food Critics Who Can't Cook. According to my source at his publisher, it would have exposed what Bouvier called the corruption and incompetence in food journalism, with Graves as Exhibit A. Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. Indeed. And Miss Lansing? Gourmet Essentials is in financial trouble. They've poured millions into a new line of cookware designed by Bouvier, launching next month. Their stock dropped 15% just this afternoon on news of his death. And Mr. Reed? That required some digging. Reed was Bouvier's right hand, but he was also developing his own brand on the side. He has a cookbook in development and was negotiating for his own cooking show. Something Bouvier didn't know about. If it had come out, it would have likely ended their professional relationship. Wolfe nodded slightly, then pressed the buzzer for Fritz. When he appeared, Wolfe said, "Fritz, I require your professional assessment. If one wished to poison a hollandaise sauce, at what stage would it be most effectively introduced?" Fritz's eyebrows shot up, but he considered the question seriously. "It would depend on the poison, sir. If it could withstand heat, during the clarification of the butter would be simplest. If not, after the sauce is completed but before serving. Would you notice a foreign substance being added to your preparation?" "Most certainly, if I were watching continuously, but in a busy kitchen with multiple tasks." Fritz spread his hands. "There are moments of inattention, especially during a demonstration when one must engage with an audience." "Thank you. You, Fritz. That will be all for now." After Fritz departed, Wolfe turned back to me. "Archie, I require Saul." I reached for the phone and dialed Saul Panzer's number. When he answered, I passed the phone to Wolfe. "Saul? Good afternoon. I have a task of some delicacy." Wolfe outlined what he wanted: a thorough investigation of Leonard Graves's background, with particular attention to any botanical knowledge or interests he might possess. "And please be discreet. The connection must not be apparent." After hanging up, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I knew better than to interrupt when he was processing information, so I busied myself with typing up my notes. The office was quiet except for the click of my typewriter keys and the occasional sound of Wolfe sipping beer. Finally, he opened his eyes. "We need more. Call Miss Moore and arrange interviews with our 3 principals. Here, preferably, but their locations if necessary." "All 3? Today?" I glanced at the clock. "It's nearly 4 hours. You'll miss your afternoon session with the orchids." "Theodore will manage. This matter takes precedence." That surprised me. Wolfe adjusting his sacred schedule was rarer than a total solar eclipse. I made the calls, and to my surprise, all 3 agreed to come to the brownstone that evening. Reed at 6, Lansing at 7, and Graves at 8. "They're all unusually cooperative," I noted after confirming with Graves. "Naturally," Wolfe replied. "Each believes they have nothing to fear from scrutiny, or they wish to observe what we know." He closed the book on his desk. "Before they arrive, please contact Inspector Kramer. Inform him of my interest in the case and request the autopsy results when available. He'll want to know who's paying us. Tell him I am pursuing this as a matter of personal interest, for the moment." I raised my eyebrows but didn't comment. Wolfe taking a case without a client was unprecedented, but then again, so was witnessing a murder during a cooking demonstration. As I reached for the phone to call Kramer, I couldn't help wondering what Wolfe had seen in that studio kitchen that had piqued his interest so thoroughly. Whatever it was, I suspected it was a detail that the rest of us, even the sharp-eyed Inspector Kramer, had missed entirely. "Oh, and Archie," Wolfe added, "please ask Fritz to prepare a light dinner for 9 cows. Nothing elaborate, I believe. Our evening interviews will prove nutritive in their own way." Chapter 5. Simmering Tensions. James Reed arrived at the brownstone precisely at 6 Gubais. I showed him into the office, noting the way his eyes widened slightly at the sight of Wolfe's custom chair, the globe, and the bookshelves. He was dressed in a gray suit that fit him well enough but looked uncomfortable on his frame, as if he spent most of his time in chef's whites. "Mr. Reed," Wolfe greeted him without rising. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." He indicated the red leather chair. Reed perched on the edge of it like a man expecting to be ejected at any moment. "I'm not sure how I can help, Mr. Wolfe. I've already told the police everything I know." "Doubtful," Wolfe replied. "The police ask directed questions, seeking specific answers. I prefer a more comprehensive understanding." I took my place at my desk, notebook ready. Wolfe took a sip of beer, his second of the evening session, and studied Reed for a moment. "Tell me about your professional relationship with Mr. Bouvier." Reed ran a finger around his collar. "I was his sous chef for 4 years. Before that, I worked at his restaurant, Marcel." "And the nature of your interactions?" "Professional. Chef Bouvier was demanding, exacting. He had very specific standards." "Was he aware of your cookbook project?" Reed's head jerked up, his eyes narrowing. "How did you—" "It is a matter of public record with your publisher," Wolfe said, which wasn't strictly true, but Reed didn't challenge it. No, he wasn't aware. "I was going to tell him once the deal was finalized. Yet you must have known he would consider it competitive." Reed's jaw tightened. "My cookbook focuses on sustainable cooking practices. Marcel's brand was about luxury and indulgence. Different markets entirely." "And your television aspirations?" A flush crept up Reed's neck. "That was preliminary. Just conversations with the same network as the gourmet show." "I understand." Reed stood abruptly. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. Yes, we had different visions. Yes, he could be a tyrannical boss, but he gave me my start in this industry. I respected him." "Respected," Wolfe noted. "Past tense. Because he's dead?" Reed snapped. "Look, I was right there, beside him. If I'd poisoned the sauce, I'd have been taking an insane risk." "Perhaps," Wolfe conceded. "One final question. The ventilation system in the studio kitchen, is it connected to the building's central air conditioning?" Reed blinked, clearly thrown by the change in direction. "No, it's a separate system. The studio kitchen has dedicated ventilation to handle cooking odors and heat." "Why?" "Merely curiosity." "Thank you, Mr. Reed. That will be all for now." After Reed departed, looking more unsettled than when he arrived, I raised an eyebrow at Wolfe. "Ventilation systems? That's a new line of inquiry." "Context, Archie. Always context." He glanced at his watch. "Miss Lansing will arrive shortly. During her visit, please observe her hands, specifically her fingernails." "Her fingernails?" I repeated. "Yes. And any jewelry she wears." Victoria Lansing arrived 10 minutes early, which immediately told me something about her. People who arrive early to appointments typically want to establish control over the situation. She was impeccably dressed in what I guessed was a 4-figure suit, her blonde hair arranged in a sleek bob that looked effortless but probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Wolfe," she said crisply, extending a hand that he predictably didn't take. "I've heard a great deal about you." "Indeed." Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. "Please." Following Wolfe's instructions, I noted her hands as she settled herself. Her nails were expertly manicured in a subtle pink shade, and she wore only 2 pieces of jewelry, a slim gold watch and a signet ring on her right hand. Miss Lansing, what is the current market valuation of gourmet essentials? Wolfe asked without preamble. If she was startled by the direct approach, she didn't show it. Approximately 20 million, though today's events will impact that significantly. By what percentage is your personal wealth tied to the company's performance? Nearly 90%. I'm the majority shareholder. Her eyes narrowed slightly. But if you're suggesting I'd murder the face of my brand to protect my investment, you're missing a fundamental point of business, Mr. Wolfe. Dead spokesmen don't sell cookware. Unless their tragic demise creates a posthumous demand, I suggested. Limited edition Marcel Bouvier Memorial Collections, perhaps? She gave me a look cold enough to freeze the Hudson. That's ghoulish, Mr. Goodwin, and short-sighted. We had a 5-year contract with Marcel, with projected revenue increases of 30% year over year. Yet I understand the company is facing financial difficulties, Wolfe said. Temporary cash flow issues due to production investments. The new product line would have resolved those within 2 quarters. She crossed her legs and leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wolfe, let me be direct. Marcel alive was worth far more to me than Marcel dead. Furthermore, I wasn't anywhere near that sauce. I was standing off camera throughout the demonstration. I'm aware, Wolfe said. One more question. Did you interact with Leonard Graves at any point before the broadcast? She frowned briefly. He was in the green room when I arrived, to check on the product placement. We exchanged pleasantries. Why? Simple thoroughness. Thank you for your time, Miss Lansing. After showing her out, I returned to find Wolfe making a note on his desk pad. Well? I asked. Her fingernails were indeed illuminating, he said, as was her response regarding Mr. Graves. Before I could press him further, the doorbell rang again. Leonard Graves had arrived precisely on time for his 8-way appointment. Thar. Food Critic was a study in careful presentation. His tweed jacket had leather patches at the elbows, a bit cliched for a man of letters, but he wore it with the confidence of someone who had earned the right to clichés. His beard was neatly trimmed, his spectacles polished to gleaming. His manner was deferential without being obsequious. Mr. Wolfe, he said as he took the red leather chair, I must say it's an honor. I've followed your cases with interest over the years. Have you? Wolfe seemed unimpressed. I understand you followed Mr. Bouvier's career, with rather more critical attention. Graves smiled thinly. Ah, yes. My professional assessments weren't always to his liking, but that's the nature of criticism, isn't it? Not every review can be favorable. I refer specifically to the incident at last year's International Food Festival. The smile faltered. An unfortunate public disagreement. Marcel was always one for theatrics. Theatrics that humiliated you professionally. Graves's fingers tightened slightly on the armrests. Temporarily. In my world, Mr. Wolfe, today's embarrassment is tomorrow's forgotten anecdote. And his forthcoming book, the one examining the ethics of food critics, with you as a principal subject? Would that also have been a forgotten anecdote? This time, Graves couldn't hide his reaction. His face went slack with surprise before he recovered. I wasn't aware of any such book. Weren't you? Wolfe's tone made it clear he didn't believe him. Mr. Graves, do you have any particular interest in botanical studies? The abrupt shift seemed to throw Graves even further off balance. Well, yes, actually. I maintain a small herb garden, essential for developing a nuanced palate. Why do you ask? And more exotic specimens? Any interest there? I'm not sure what you're implying, Graves said stiffly. I imply nothing. I inquire. Wolfe reached for his beer. One final question. What did you discuss with Miss Lansing before the broadcast? Victoria? Nothing of consequence? The weather, the upcoming segment? Small talk. I see. Thank you, Mr. Graves. That will be all for now. After Graves left, I locked the front door and returned to the office. That was interesting, I observed. Graves definitely didn't know we knew about the book. Yes, Wolfe pressed the button for Fritz, who appeared promptly. Dinner in 15 minutes, Fritz. As Fritz departed to make the final preparations, the phone rang. I answered to find Saul Panzer on the line. Got something from Mr. Wolfe, he said in his quiet way. Graves maintains more than just an herb garden. He's a member of the Rare Botanical Society and specializes in tropical specimens with medicinal properties. He's published 3 articles in their journal under a pseudonym. Hold on. I covered the mouthpiece. Saul has information about Graves's botanical interests. Wolfe took the phone, listened to Saul's report with his eyes half closed, then said simply, "Excellent work, Saul. Continue." Hanging up, he looked at me. "We will need to inspect the studio's ventilation system tomorrow morning." Going to share why? In due course. He rose from his chair with surprising energy. Come, Archie, dinner awaits, and afterward I have correspondence to dictate. As we headed to the dining room, I reflected that Wolfe seemed almost energized by this case, a rare occurrence without a paying client. Whatever he had noticed about Victoria Lansing's fingernails, combined with Graves's botanical hobby, and his questions about ventilation systems, was clearly forming a pattern in his mind. But as usual, he would reveal his thoughts only when he was good and ready. Chapter 6. A Recipe for Deception. We arrived at Studio 10 at 9 the next morning. Wolfe, who normally would rather have his teeth extracted without anesthesia than leave the brownstone before lunch, was uncharacteristically alert. Diana Moore met us in the lobby, looking tired but composed. The police have released the studio. For cleaning, she told us, leading the way to the elevator. They've taken all the equipment from the kitchen set for testing. All of it? Wolfe asked. Everything that could have come into contact with food or ingredients. But not the ventilation components, I presume. Diana gave him a curious look. No, I don't believe so. Why? A hypothesis requiring verification, Wolfe said. I would appreciate access to the maintenance areas above the set. 10 minutes later, we were standing on a narrow catwalk above the studio ceiling, accompanied by a maintenance worker named Harkins, who seemed baffled by our interest in air ducts. This whole section serves the kitchen area, Harkins explained, pointing to a complex arrangement of metal ductwork. It's a specialized system because of the cooking odors and heat. Wolfe examined the setup with surprising focus, considering his usual aversion to physical effort. The exhaust vents are located directly above the cooking stations? Yeah, and they're pretty powerful. Have to be with all those burners going, and this system was operational during the broadcast, running at full capacity. It's automatic. Kicks in whenever the set lights are on, I see. Wolfe carefully studied a section where a duct branched into smaller channels. Archie, your impression? I looked where he indicated and noticed something unusual, a small access panel that appeared to have been recently opened. The screws were shiny, lacking the dust that covered the surrounding area. Someone's been up here recently, I said. Indeed. Wolfe turned to Harkins. Is there a maintenance log for this area? Sure, in the office downstairs. But this section wouldn't have been scheduled for routine maintenance for another month. After examining the ducts for another 15 minutes, with Wolfe directing me to photograph specific sections with my phone. We returned to the studio. Level. Diana was waiting for us, looking increasingly curious. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "Possibly," Wolfe replied. "I would like to see the maintenance logs. And then I require a word with Inspector Kramer." The logs showed no authorized maintenance for the ventilation system in the past 3 weeks. When we called Kramer from Diana's office, he was predictably irritated. "Wolfe, I don't have time for your games," he barked through the speakerphone. "The autopsy confirmed neurotoxin poisoning, but we haven't identified the specific agent yet. The lab is still working on it." "I believe it will be a plant-derived compound," Wolfe said. "Possibly from a tropical species. And I suggest you examine, not just the food items, but the ventilation system above the kitchen set." A pause followed. "The ventilation system? Why the hell would we look there?" "Because, Inspector, poison administered through the hollandaise would affect anyone who consumed it. Mr. Bouvier was the only victim." Another longer pause. "You're saying it was in the air? Targeted specifically at him?" "I am saying it would be prudent to investigate that possibility. I also suggest you inquire whether Mr. Graves visited the studio on any occasion prior to the broadcast." "Graves? The critic? What's your evidence?" "Not evidence, Inspector. Merely a suggestion based on observation." Kramer's frustrated sigh was audible through the speaker. "Fine, I'll send a team to check the vents. But this better not be one of your wild goose chases." After ending the call, Wolfe turned to Diana. "Miss Moore, I require one additional piece of information. Did anyone other than staff have access to the studio in the days preceding the broadcast?" She considered this. "The cleaning crew comes in nightly, and we had a special maintenance team in last week to upgrade some lighting equipment. They had access to the catwalks." Her eyes widened slightly. "You don't think I think nothing definitive as yet," Wolfe said. "Now, if you would be so kind as to arrange for us to speak with Mr. Reed again. I understand he's been continuing production meetings despite recent events." "Yes, he's been designated interim host while the network decides how to proceed. I can call him now." We met Reed in the studio cafeteria 30 minutes later. He looked even more haggard than during our interview, with dark circles under his eyes and a jumpiness to his movements that suggested too much coffee and too little sleep. "I'm not sure what else I can tell you," he said after we'd settled at a corner table. "I'm interested in your movements in the days before the broadcast," Wolfe said. "Specifically, did you observe anyone unusual accessing the studio?" Reed frowned. "Not really. It was hectic. We were finalizing the recipes, testing the camera angles, adjusting the lighting. There were technicians everywhere. And Mr. Graves, did he visit the studio before the broadcast day?" "Graves?" Reed looked surprised. "No, I don't think so. Though..." He paused, thinking. "Wait, I did see him in the hallway outside the studio 2 days before. I assumed he was meeting with someone from programming. Did you speak with him?" "Briefly. Just hello." "He seemed in a hurry." Wolfe nodded slightly. "Mr. Reed, one final question. Was Mr. Bouvier in the habit of tasting ingredients before cooking?" "Always. He was obsessive about quality control. He'd taste the butter, the eggs, everything before it went into a recipe, including during the broadcast." "Especially then?" "Especially then. He said you could tell a lot about a chef by watching them taste their ingredients. It was part of his brand, the discriminating palate and all that." "Thank you, Mr. Reed." That is most helpful. After Reed left, I turned to Wolfe. So Bouvier tasted ingredients, but nobody else did. And Graves was in the studio building before the broadcast. Yes. 2 pertinent facts. Wolfe checked his watch. It is nearly noon, Archie. We must return to the brownstone. I have an appointment with my orchids, and afterward, I expect Saul will have additional information for us. On the taxi ride back, Wolfe was silent, his eyes half closed in thought. I knew better than to interrupt when he was processing information, but I was beginning to see the outlines of his theory. The ventilation system, Graves's botanical knowledge, Bouvier's habit of tasting ingredients, they were forming a pattern, though I couldn't yet see how Victoria Lansing's manicured nails fit into the picture. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe spent his customary 2 hours with the orchids while I typed up my notes from the morning's investigation. At precisely 2 p.m, he returned to the office and settled into his chair. Archie, please call Inspector Kramer. I wish to know if his team has examined the ventilation system yet. Kramer was out, but Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins took the call. Yeah. We checked those ducts, Pearlie said, his tone suggesting he considered it a waste of time. Found something interesting, though. Traces of some plant material in one of the vents directly above where Bouvier was standing. Lab's analyzing it now. Did you determine how it might have been introduced into the system? There's a small access panel that shows signs of tampering. Someone could have placed something there that would be pulled into the airflow when the system was running at full capacity. When I reported this to Wolfe, he nodded with satisfaction. As expected. Now we must await Saul's report. Saul called at 4:30, just as Wolfe was returning from his afternoon session with the orchids. I put him on speakerphone. I've been looking into Graves's botanical activities, Saul reported. He maintains a small greenhouse specializing in rare tropical plants, including several with known toxic properties. More interestingly, he recently published an article under his pseudonym about aerosolized plant compounds and their potential culinary applications. Aerosolized? Wolfe repeated, most illuminating. Thank you, Saul. After the call ended, Wolfe sat in silence for several minutes, his fingertips pressed together. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at me. Archie, I believe it is time to arrange a dinner party here at the brownstone. A dinner party? Yes. For tomorrow evening. Please invite Mr. Reed, Miss Lansing, Mr. Graves, Miss Moore, and Inspector Kramer. Inform Fritz that we will require a special menu. Any particular theme for this dinner? Well, indeed. We will be recreating, with certain crucial modifications, Mr. Bouvier's final menu. I wish Fritz to prepare classical French sauces with particular emphasis on hollandaise. You're going to reenact the murder scene over dinner, in a manner of speaking. Though I assure you, our version will be considerably less lethal. I reached for the phone to begin making the arrangements, wondering how Wolfe intended to use a dinner party to trap a murderer. Whatever he had planned, it promised to be both elaborate and theatrical, a fitting end to a case that had begun with a culinary performance gone fatally wrong. The pieces were starting to come together, though I suspected Wolfe was still holding back key elements of his theory. Something about Victoria Lansing's manicured hands still nagged at me, and I couldn't quite see how it connected to Graves's botanical expertise and the tampered ventilation system. But I knew from experience that Wolfe would reveal everything, in his own time, and usually with a flair for the dramatic that rivaled anything on television. Chapter 7. The final ingredient, preparations for Wolfe's dinner party, consumed most of the following day. Fritz was in a state of controlled frenzy, his domain off-limits to everyone except when he summoned Wolfe to taste a sauce or approve a modification to the menu. I spent the morning delivering the invitations personally, rather than calling on Wolfe's explicit instructions. I wish to observe their immediate reactions, he had explained, which you will report in detail. James Reed received his invitation in the network offices, where he was reviewing scripts for upcoming episodes. His reaction was cautious bewilderment. Dinner party at Nero Wolfe's home? He studied the embossed card. Is this some kind of trap? Mr. Wolfe is known for his hospitality, I said with a straight face. And for Fritz Brenner's cooking, which makes most restaurants seem like roadside diners. But why me? And why now, in the middle of a murder investigation? Mr. Wolfe believes breaking bread together facilitates conversation. He has several matters to discuss regarding the show's future. Reed hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll be there. Victoria Lansing was less accommodating. I found her at Gourmet Essentials headquarters, a sleek space of glass and chrome that probably cost more per square foot than most Manhattan apartments. Absolutely not, she said, handing the invitation back. I have no intention of participating in some murder mystery dinner theater. I've already spoken with Mr. Wolfe and the police. Miss Lansing, I said, placing the invitation on her desk, I should mention that Inspector Kramer will be attending, along with James Reed and Diana Moore. Refusing might be interpreted unfavorably. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. Is that some kind of threat, Mr. Goodwin? Just an observation. Mr. Wolfe also mentioned that the evening will include a discussion of the new Gourmet Essentials product line, specifically how the network might handle promotion following recent events. That got her attention. After a moment's consideration, she picked up the invitation. 7, you said? Yes. Business attire is fine. Leonard Graves proved the most difficult to locate. I finally tracked him down at the offices of his magazine, where he was finishing a column. His reaction to the invitation was the most interesting of the three. Dinner with Nero Wolfe? His eyes widened behind his spectacles, and I noted a slight tremor in his hand as he accepted the card. I've heard his meals are legendary. But I'm puzzled about the timing. Mr. Wolfe believes the case is nearing resolution and wishes to discuss certain botanical aspects that might interest you. Botanical aspects? The tremor in his hand became more pronounced. What exactly does that mean? He mentioned something about aerosolization techniques. He thought you might have insights. Graves carefully placed the invitation in his jacket pocket. I see. Well, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I reported these reactions to Wolfe when I returned to the brownstone, finding him in the kitchen, with Fritz sampling a béarnaise sauce. Satisfactory, he said to Fritz, then turned to me. So all have accepted, with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Graves seemed the most nervous, especially when you mentioned botanical aerosolization. As expected. Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin. And the recording equipment? Saul delivered it. This morning. I've set it up in the office, with the remote microphones placed in the dining room. Excellent. And Inspector Kramer? Called personally to confirm. He thinks this is all nonsense, but doesn't want to miss whatever you're planning to reveal. Wolfe nodded, satisfied, and turned back to Fritz. The hollandaise must be perfect, Fritz. It is central to the evenings. Purpose. It will be, sir, Fritz assured him. I have prepared the clarified butter exactly as discussed. At 6:30 that evening, everything was ready. The dining room table was set with Wolfe's best china and silver. The remote microphones were discreetly placed beneath the centerpiece and at strategic points around the room. I had positioned a small camera that would activate when I pressed a remote trigger in my pocket. Diana Moore arrived first, looking elegant in a deep blue dress. Inspector Kramer came next, scowling and chewing an unlit cigar. Victoria Lansing followed shortly after, her business attire impeccable, her expression guarded. James Reed arrived precisely at 7 WA, and Leonard Graves was the last to appear at 7:10, apologizing for the delay. I escorted each guest to the front room for pre-dinner drinks. Wolfe remained in the office until everyone had arrived, then made his entrance at 7:15. He greeted each guest with minimal courtesy, accepted a beer from Fritz, and took his seat. "Thank you all for coming," he said after a small sip. "I trust the inconvenience is justified by both Fritz's cuisine and the resolution of our mutual concern." "And what exactly is our mutual concern?" Kramer asked, not bothering to hide his impatience. "The murder of Marcel Bouvier, of course," Wolfe replied. "Crime I believe we will have fully illuminated by the end of this evening." A tense silence followed this announcement. I observed our guests carefully. Reed looked uncomfortable but curious. Diana Moore, expectant. Victoria Lansing, skeptical. And Leonard Graves, distinctly uneasy, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his glass. Before dinner, Wolfe continued, "I would like to pose a theoretical question. If one wished to eliminate a specific individual in a crowded setting, how might one ensure that only the intended target was affected?" "What kind of question is that?" Lansing demanded. "A pertinent one," Wolfe replied. "Inspector Kramer, would you care to speculate?" Kramer removed his cigar and frowned. "You'd need a targeted delivery method, something that would affect only the victim." "Precisely. And in a cooking demonstration, where food might be shared or sampled by multiple individuals, what method would ensure only the chef was affected?" "The air," Reed said suddenly. "Something." In the air directly above his station. Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, Mr. Reed. An astute observation." "I don't understand," Diana said. "Are you saying Marcel wasn't poisoned through the food?" "The toxin was not in the hollandaise, no," Wolfe confirmed. "It was introduced through the ventilation system, positioned to disperse directly over Mr. Bouvier's station when the system was running at full capacity during the broadcast." Leonard Graves cleared his throat. "That sounds highly speculative." "Mr. Wolfe." "Not at all. The police laboratory has confirmed traces of a plant-derived neurotoxin in the vent above Mr. Bouvier's cooking station, a toxin that, when heated and aerosolized, would affect only someone standing directly beneath it for a sustained period, such as a chef conducting a lengthy demonstration." Graves took a sip of his whiskey, his hand noticeably unsteady. "Fascinating theory. But how would someone even access such a toxin, let alone know how to deploy it?" "An excellent question," Wolfe said. "One that I believe will be answered during our dinner conversation. Shall we proceed to the dining room?" Fritz has prepared a classic French menu in tribute to Mr. Bouvier's final demonstration. I watched our guests carefully as they moved to the dining room. Kramer looked grudgingly impressed by Wolfe's theory. Diana and Reed seemed to be processing the implications. Victoria Lansing maintained her composed facade but studied Graves with new interest. And Graves himself moved with the careful precision of a man walking on thin ice, his earlier tremor now a constant companion. The first course was a simple salad with vinaigrette, which Fritz served with his usual flourish. Wolfe waited until everyone had taken their first bites before continuing the conversation. "The ventilation system at Studio 10 is quite sophisticated," he said. It requires specialized knowledge to access and manipulate, knowledge that one might acquire if, for instance, one had arranged for maintenance work on the studio's lighting system the week before the broadcast. Graves's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What exactly are you implying, Mr. Wolfe? I imply nothing. I merely observe connections between disparate facts. Wolfe took a small bite of salad. Fritz's vinaigrette is exceptional, is it not? The perfect balance of oil, acid, and herbs. Your demonstration of how botanical elements properly prepared can transform a simple dish. Speaking of botanical elements, Kramer interjected, our lab finally identified the toxin, a rare compound derived from a tropical plant. Not something your average person would have access to, unless, Wolfe added, one were a member of the Rare Botanical Society with a specialized greenhouse. Would you agree, Mr. Graves? All eyes turned to the critic, who had gone very still. This time, main course arrived. Roast duck with a trio of sauces, including hollandaise, creating a momentary diversion. I used the opportunity to activate the hidden camera with the remote in my pocket. As Fritz served the hollandaise, I noticed Wolfe watching Graves with particular attention. The critic stared at the pale yellow sauce as though it might rear. Up and bite him. Mr. Graves is something of an expert on botanical toxins, Wolfe continued conversationally. He has published several articles on the subject under a pseudonym, articles that explore, among other topics, the aerosolization of plant compounds. The evening was building to Wolfe's carefully orchestrated confrontation. I could feel the tension mounting around the table as each piece of the puzzle slid into place. Victoria Lansing was watching Graves like a hawk now, while Reed and Diana exchanged glances of dawning comprehension. Kramer sat back in his chair, letting Wolfe lead the dance that would end, inevitably, with a murderer revealed and justice served. Graves reached for his water glass, his fingers trembling so badly now that he nearly knocked it over. The final act of our dinner theater was about to begin, and judging by the critic's rapidly deteriorating composure, it promised to be exactly the dramatic conclusion Wolfe had planned. Chapter 8. The proof in the pudding. Wolfe savored a bite of duck, chewed thoughtfully and swallowed before continuing. Every eye at the table was fixed on him, with occasional glances toward Graves, who seemed to be shrinking into his chair. The murder of Marcel Bouvier was both ingenious and petty, Wolfe said. Ingenious in its execution, petty in its motivation. It required technical knowledge, botanical expertise, and an understanding of the victim's habits. Get to the point, Wolfe, Kramer growled, though with less heat than usual. He was watching Graves too. Very well. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. The killing was accomplished through the use of a rare plant toxin, aerosolized and positioned in the ventilation duct directly above Mr. Bouvier's cooking station. The compound was contained in a small receptacle designed to release its contents when heated by the studio lights and pulled into the airflow of the ventilation system. But how would the killer ensure only Marcel was affected? Diana asked. Anyone near the cooking station could have been poisoned. An excellent question, Wolfe replied. The answer lies in Mr. Bouvier's habits, which Mr. Reed confirmed for us. Unlike most cooking show hosts who merely display ingredients, Bouvier insisted on tasting each component before using it. The killer knew this and calculated that only Bouvier would be directly under the vent long enough and breathing deeply enough while tasting and commenting on his ingredients to receive a lethal dose. Reed nodded slowly. That's true. Marcel always spent at least 30 seconds with each ingredient, describing its quality, origin, even its texture and aroma. He'd inhale deeply before tasting. It was part of his signature style. The toxin, Wolfe continued, was derived from a rare tropical plant that, when processed correctly, creates a compound that acts on the nervous system within minutes of inhalation. It is virtually undetectable unless specifically tested for, and leaves minimal traces. The killer, I suggest, has extensive knowledge of such plants. You can't possibly know all this, Graves protested, his voice strained. You're theorizing without evidence. On the contrary, Kramer interjected, our lab found traces of plant material in the vent, just as Wolfe suggested we might. And there were signs the access panel had been tampered with. Which brings us to opportunity, Wolfe said. The killer needed access to the studio before the broadcast. We know from the maintenance logs that no authorized personnel accessed the ventilation system recently. However, the week before the broadcast, technicians were upgrading the lighting system, which required access to the same catwalks that service the ventilation ducts. I still don't see how this points to anyone specific, Lansing said, though her eyes remained fixed on Graves. Patience, Miss Lansing. The method has been established. Now we consider motive and specific opportunity. Wolfe turned his attention fully to Graves. Mr. Graves, you were observed in the studio building 2 days before the broadcast. What was the purpose of your visit? Graves adjusted his glasses with unsteady fingers. As I mentioned before, I was there to meet with someone from programming. A completely innocent professional discussion. And yet, Wolfe said, studio records show no such meeting scheduled. More interestingly, the same records indicate that the lighting technicians were working that afternoon, specifically on the catwalks above the kitchen set. This is absurd. Graves' voice rose. You're spinning a fantasy based on circumstantial connections. Then let us consider motive, Wolfe replied calmly. Marcel Bouvier publicly humiliated you at the International Food Festival last year, a professional embarrassment that damaged your reputation among your peers. More significantly, he was preparing to publish a book that would have further undermined your credibility as a critic. That's not, I didn't. Graves paused, visibly struggling to compose himself. Even if I had reason to dislike the man, that hardly makes me a murderer. Indeed not. But combined with your expertise in rare botanical toxins, your documented research on aerosolization techniques, your greenhouse containing the specific plant from which the toxin was derived, and your presence in the studio shortly before the murder, the aggregation becomes compelling. Graves blanched. My greenhouse? How could you possibly know what plants I grow? Wolfe's slight smile told me he'd been waiting for precisely this misstep. I made no specific claim about the contents of your greenhouse, Mr. Graves. Merely that it contains the plant in question. Your response confirms it. The room fell silent. Fritz appeared to serve coffee, his movements precise and unobtrusive despite the tension. There's one other piece of evidence, I added. When you visited the studio that day, you signed in as a consultant to the lighting crew. I spoke with the head technician this morning. He remembers you clearly, because you wore specialized gloves while examining the equipment, ostensibly to protect the sensitive lighting elements. Gloves that would prevent you from leaving fingerprints on the ventilation access panel, Kramer said, sitting forward. This is still all circumstantial, Graves insisted, though his defiance was crumbling visibly. You can't prove any of it. Perhaps not to legal standards. Not yet, Wolfe agreed. But I believe your own words will provide the final evidence needed. You see, Mr. Graves, your expertise in botanical toxins is genuine. I suspect you take pride in your knowledge, pride that might lead you to reveal details only the killer would know. I've said nothing incriminating. Graves insisted. Not yet, Wolfe conceded. But I believe you will. He gestured to Fritz, who appeared with a small glass dish containing a greenish powder. Do you recognize this substance, Mr. Graves? Graves stared at the dish, transfixed. That is... What is it supposed to be? A sample found in the ventilation system, provided by Inspector Kramer. I'm curious about your professional assessment. Graves couldn't seem to tear his eyes from the powder. It could be anything. Plant matter. Breaks down, becomes unidentifiable. Yet this sample seems remarkably intact, Wolfe observed. Almost as though it had been processed to maintain its potency even when subjected to heat, a technique few would know how to execute properly. Graves licked his lips nervously. The process isn't that complex if you understand the chemical properties. You'd need to extract the alkaloids using a specific solvent then. He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. Please continue, Wolfe prompted. The specific solvent being, this is ridiculous. Graves looked desperately around the table, finding no allies. Fine. Yes, I did it. After what he did to me, after what he was planning to do with that book. Do you have any idea what it's like to have decades of professional work undermined by a celebrity chef who couldn't tell confit from casserole without a recipe card? The confession poured out of him then. How he'd researched the toxin, prepared it in his greenhouse, and placed it in the ventilation system during the lighting upgrade. How he'd calculated the dosage based on Bouvier's habits and the airflow patterns. How he'd worn specialized gloves and clothing to prevent any evidence from remaining on his person. When he finished, the room was silent. Kramer nodded to me and I stopped the recording device hidden beneath the centerpiece. That should do it, Kramer said, standing. Leonard Graves, you're under arrest for the murder of Marcel Bouvier. He nodded to Wolfe with grudging respect. Nice work. As usual. After Kramer had taken Graves away, the remaining guests sat in stunned silence. Diana was the first to speak. I can't believe it. All because of a public humiliation and a forthcoming book? Professional pride is a powerful motivator, Wolfe observed. For some, the reputation is their entire identity. We finished the meal in subdued conversation. Reed discussed his plans for continuing the show. Lansing outlined a revised marketing strategy for her company's products. And Diana expressed her gratitude for Wolfe's involvement. By the time coffee and brandy were served in the office after dinner, the shock had worn off enough for normal conversation to resume. After our guests departed, I sat at my desk to make final notes on the case while Wolfe settled into his chair with a book. You never did explain what tipped you off initially, I said. What did you notice at the studio that first day that put you onto this track? Wolfe sighed and marked his place in his book. 2 things. First, the way Bouvier collapsed indicated a neurotoxin, which suggested a targeted approach rather than food contamination that might affect others. Second, I observed Mr. Graves watching the ventilation system rather than the body or the food, a curious focus for someone supposedly concerned with culinary matters, and Victoria Lansing's fingernails. You made a point of having me observe them. Ah, yes. Miss Lansing's immaculate manicure made it highly unlikely she had handled botanical compounds recently. Such work invariably stains the nail beds in ways even the best manicurist cannot disguise. Mr. Graves, by contrast, wore gloves throughout the dinner, removing them only to eat, another telling detail. Clever, I acknowledged, though I'm surprised. You took the case without a client. The corruption of cuisine for murderous purposes is an affront to civilization, Wolfe said with unexpected heat. Some transgressions cannot be ignored regardless of financial considerations. The next morning, I was typing up the final report when a courier delivered an envelope from Diana Moore. Inside was a check for a substantial sum and a note. The network considers this a small price for solving a crime that could have destroyed the show. With deepest thanks. Wolfe examined the check and nodded. Satisfactory, he said, then returned to his book. I filed the check and finished the report, reflecting that justice had been served, not just for Bouvier, but for the sanctity of proper cooking as well. In Wolfe's world, that was perhaps the greater victory. Thanks for joining us for A Corpse for Breakfast. Did you suspect the food critic before Wolfe revealed his botanical expertise? Were you puzzled by Wolfe's interest in the ventilation system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep your mind sharp and your coffee strong. This is Alie, signing off from Café Tales.